The securely attached people tend to move towards others in relationships. So if there's conflict, they even move towards others if there's some of those high level, what we'd call uncomfortable emotions like anger or sadness or disappointment, tend to move towards our spouse with those feelings. Conflict isn't necessarily a scary thing. That doesn't mean securely attached couples don't have conflict. All couples have conflict.
Yeah.
Ever since the fall, Adam and Eve, we kind of see before the garden, or before the fall, excuse me, and they're kind of in this perfect unity. And then after the fall, what do? They move away from each other.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we're going to bring you the third and final installment of a three-part series on attachment styles with our host, Dr. Mark Laaser, and Jim Farm, the clinical director at Faithful and True. We hope that this three-part series has been a meaningful and beneficial series for you. We'd also like to invite you to consider coming to our Men's Journey workshop. All the information on those workshops are available at faithfulandtrue.com. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and Jim Farm.
Today we're continuing our series that we've been doing on attachment theory, and our guest has been one of our therapists here at Faithful and True, Jim Farm. Jim, welcome again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I think this will be the conclusion of our series because we're going to talk about the last of the four attachment styles and the third of the unhealthy ones. And then we want to conclude by talking about the healthy ones, secure. So we want to give the listeners some ideas about how they might move in that direction of secure attachment, that is.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to that part of it as well. So we have what are we working towards? What's the vision that we're looking at?
The vision, that would be it.
Vision is a big word for us around here. We like that.
Yeah.
Vision today. Yeah, exactly. So can you just briefly review the two that we talked about last week? We know there's secure attachment. We're going to get to that at the end. And last week we talked about the avoidant attachment and the ambivalent or anxious attachment. Do you want to just give us a real quick review of that?
Yeah, avoidant attachment. So attachment has to do with, just in review, is how we relate to those who are closest to us. So we're talking about parent-child relationships, spousal relationships. And so we have this internal working or cognitive beliefs about, ourselves and others in relationships. And so the avoidant attachment style relationship really comes about in regards to, I have a overinflated sense of self in regards to meeting my own needs. But on the flip side, I don't trust others will be there for me or meet my needs.
Right, yeah.
The ambivalent style is almost the opposite in the sense that there's an underemphasis upon ourself to get our own needs met or our capability of doing that. But there's an overemphasis upon the person that we're closest to.
Mm-hmm. It could be the spouse in a lot of cases, but it might be a friend or child, a boss, or whoever, yeah.
That's right. And so the avoidant attachment, what that would kind of look like is we tend to suppress our emotions and our needs, tend to move away from others in relationship. Mm-hmm. Where in the ambivalent attachment, we tend to, if you will, overly attach, or we get preoccupied with the other person in relationship and tend to move towards them in a more of a critical or demanding way.
Anxious way.
In an anxious way. And that's really what's going on internally, but from the outside, it looks like it's almost angry or upset.
Angry, or how could you possibly not pay attention to me, or, those kinds of things. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
And so it's very much what we would call protest behavior. I'm wanting connection, but it feels like we're not having that. And so.
Right. Yeah, okay. It's the closest one to what has historically in the recovery field been called codependency, too, I think. The anxious, ambivalent attachment.
That's right, because the codependency, we're seeking that approval of others and that acceptance for others, but there's a part of ourself that we don't feel safe enough or vulnerable enough to be able to share, so we don't, we go to great lengths to get that approval.
Well, I think we don't, particularly believe in everybody kind of self-diagnosing based on these basic descriptions that they're doing. I think if you are interested in this and you feel like, you would like to get an evaluation and so forth, it would be helpful to see a therapist who is familiar with attachment theory. And there are some verbal ways to assess this, and then I think lately there's been some psychometric tests that are out there also, don't you think?
Yeah, there's some assessment tests. I know some of them have been validated and others aren't, so you have to be careful. You can find some online, so you have to be careful about which ones you take.
Yeah, don't go to one of those popular medical journals like the Reader's Digest or Ladies' Home Medical Journal, that kind of thing. Okay. All right, so today we want to focus just in this first part on the fourth attachment, the third of the unhealthy ones, which I think is really the most serious of them, and we generally call it disorganized or confused. So go ahead and give us a description of that.
Yeah. It's kind of sad to a certain degree. My heart feels for people that come from this attachment style, because oftentimes they come from environments in which the parenting was inconsistent and oftentimes abusive at times. And so the kids are put in this position where they truly have needs, and so our natural instinct is to move towards our parents with those needs, but oftentimes it's the parents that are inflicting the pain to begin with. So we're put in this position with this great need, and our natural tendency to go towards the person that's going to provide that safety and security, but they're the ones causing the harm.
I was just thinking that there's, as we're recording this today, there's a very powerful Christian movie out there that I think really illustrates this, and it's called I Can Only Imagine. It's about the author of the song I Can Only Imagine, strangely enough, and who was profoundly abused by his father, emotionally and physically, growing up. And the love of his life he's known since he was in grade school. Have you seen the movie, by the way?
I haven't yet.
Well, they are close and date and, kind of the more or less fallen adult type of love. But there's a point in the movie where he pushes her away, ostensibly to go off to, pursue his career. But, in the midst of this great love that they have, it's just like, she is shocked. It's like he says, we're probably not going anyplace, or, I need to pursue my career. I forget all what he said, but he pushes her away. And given how the movie portrays his abuse, it makes all the sense in the world that he would want to have the relationship at one level, but then not be able to trust it at another level. So I don't want to do well, here's a spoiler alert. The movie does have a happy ending in terms of that relationship, but
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of disorganized. If we go back to the core beliefs of the disorganized attachment, it's a negative sense of self. In other words, I don't feel capable or worthy of getting my needs met, and likewise, I don't really perceive the other person as willing or capable of meeting my needs as well. So we're put in that position of going towards someone, but then fearing their response and then backing away in an angrily way,
doing things to sabotage the relationship.
That's right.
When I think about working with some of the couples here, and one of the spouses has this disorganized attachment, they can always say words that they want to be more intimate and close, but then when it gets to demonstrating that or practicing that, they're just not good at doing it, right? And that's something then that the other spouse, who may have the anxious or ambivalent attachment, is going to be kind of pushing in that direction, and the more she or he pushes in that direction, the more the disorganized attachment kind of pushes it away.
That's right.
And then we sit in counseling sessions and battle about this. So we need to get eventually to this idea that there is a secure attachment, and we all need to have a vision for going in that direction.
Yeah. One of the things that might be helpful for some folks that have gone through the disorganized attachment is maybe thinking about doing some trauma work.
Exactly.
It's very helpful. I know there's things out there now that we know that are really helpful with that. I know Elizabeth Griffin that does some work here, and Susie both do EMDR, which is helpful for folks that have been through trauma, and there's other strategies as well that are helpful in regards to that.
Yeah, it has a little clinical code here. EMDR, some of you know, is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, but it's a very well researched and demonstrated approach that can take you back to early life events and help you reprocess them in your brain and put them in different categories and kind of heal that trauma. Basically, generally what you're saying is that there are therapists and there are intensive programs out there in the country too that can really help you with this trauma. I think the worst thing to do is to rehearse the trauma over and over and over and over again with a therapist, because that just kind of reinforces the trauma. So yeah, if you're dealing with this one, by all means, get aggressive or proactive on your own behalf and get some therapy around the trauma.
That's right. It's about re-experiencing those experiences differently. It's not going through the experiences the same way you did the first time.
That's right. And one of our therapists here does theophostic, which is kind of a funky thing where I say funky, that's probably...
There you go again with your technical terms.
Technical terms. It basically is reframing it by actually using prayer to bring Christ into the room and have Christ remind us of what is really true about us. So that's the reframe. Well, you all along have been describing kind of the core beliefs behind these attachments. So, that negative sense of self or overly positive sense of self, negative sense of others. The disorganized, by the way, which we just finished with, is a negative sense of self and a negative sense of others.
That's right.
So
that's right.
So would it make sense that the secure has a positive sense of self and a positive sense of others?
That's exactly right.
I'm leading you into it now. Take over.
So just inherently trust others and trust ourselves. And that usually comes from an upbringing in which we had parents that were responsive to us for the most part. I mean, it's not perfect, but consistently.
Yeah, no parent is. Yeah.
That's right. And so we learn over time that we are capable to meeting our needs and asking for those needs to be met, and the people that are closest to us are capable and willing to meet those needs. Mm-hmm. And so the securely attached people tend to move towards others in relationships. So if there's conflict, they even move towards others if there's some of those high-level, what we'd call uncomfortable emotions like anger or sadness or disappointment, tend to move towards our spouse with those feelings. Conflict isn't necessarily a scary thing. That doesn't mean securely attached couples don't have conflict. All couples have conflict.
Yeah.
I always talk about, I know with my couples, that ever since the fall, Adam and Eve, we kind of see before the fall, and they're kind of in this perfect unity. And then after the fall, what do? They move away from each other.
The first spousal blame happens.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Then they turn against each other. So we see this turning away and turning against really early on. And I think every couple inherits that from that point on.
Well, that's kind of an interesting theological, that's really part of our human nature, isn't it?
That's right.
Fallen nature, we sometimes call it.
That's exactly right.
But that was the first time Adam blamed Eve for something. And he was actually right, in a way. Oh, no, I'm now...
As we have three men here looking at each other.
I'm glad Marlo and Debbie and Cindy are not here right now.
Well, who took the first bite? Let me just put it that way. So...
That's right. And so, that's a key identification.
Yeah.
That's right. That, some couples... I had a couple that, not too long ago, a very young couple, actually, and one of the wives was really upset because she came kind of into the marriage that, there shouldn't be conflict. Things should.
That was her expectation.
That was her expectation.
Yeah.
And so it was actually a great relief to her to realize that, conflict is actually a pretty good thing for a marriage. And so the key is do we stay connected during that conflict?
Mm-hmm. And are we able to have safe conversations about it in which we own our own part of that conflict, as opposed to blaming the other person for the conflict?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we have some really healthy tools that help us to start to build that accessibility, that responsiveness that we're looking for in terms of secure attachment. Mm-hmm. Models like Fanos that we're aware of. I think you've introduced that on the show before. Mm-hmm. The iceberg model is another great tool that we use with couples to help them to be able to have safe conversations about things.
We've done shows on all of that, I think, in the past, so look at the archives if you want to refresh yourself on that.
And so one of the key things we talk about as well is, I know I've heard Debbie say that this quite a bit, is the problem is never the problem,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so a lot of couples are fighting over what they think is the problem, but really it's something much deeper internally, a need, an expectation, a perception.
And we're bringing one of those unhealthy attachments to the behavioral problem. That's right. So secure attachment, talk a minute about this. I think it starts with trusting God. I think there's a follow-up book to the original book on attachments, at least in the Christian community, called God Attachments. But I think it begins with trusting God. But secondly, I think it begins with trusting ourselves. That's that positive sense of self. And then I think thirdly, when we trust God, trust ourselves, then it's easier to trust others.
That's right. That's right. It does start with that. So once we experience that acceptance, that unconditional acceptance of and love from God, then it allows us to be able to start, recognizing, taking responsibility for ourselves, so that we can move into our relationships vulnerable and transparent. When we're not able to do that, we kind of betray ourselves to a certain degree. We hold back part of ourselves, and thus we're not fully known by our spouse.
Well, that's a common complaint around here, that I don't know him or so forth, and because he never shares. He never shares with me his emotions or whatever.
Yeah. And so, it's one of the things we start to talk with both, the husband and the wife that come here is, first of all, being able to be aware of what you're feeling and then being able to start to express that. And oftentimes we start to teach that in a lot of the groups that we have here as well.
Sure. So let's say, some of the listeners out there, they really want to work on this, trying to, develop a vision of secure attachment and get there. What would be some of our recommendations, do you think, for them to pursue? So
Okay.
we need to give people a sense of hope and direction, I think, after all this stuff that we've talked about. So
Yeah. Well, I think it starts first, maybe starting to do some individual work to start to understand, what have I learned in regards to, how I think about myself, how I think about others. Do I trust others? Do I trust myself? So starting to do some individual work, understand the beliefs I've developed over time. And then there's always an element of risk. There's always an element of risk in regards to the next step is once I start to gain that awareness, now I have to be willing to have the courage to start to be vulnerable with others around
other
that.
people, like vulnerable enough to go to a workshop even, or go to a group. I was talking to a guy just about that yesterday, and he said, I just don't like groups. I have panic attacks, and so I finally worked out with him that he's going to come to the workshop eventually, and we'll sit him on the closest chair to the door, and he needs to take enough risk at least to walk into the room.
That's right. And that's kind of the some of the issue right there is oftentimes we have to put ourselves in the position that we fear the most in order to start experiencing it differently. If we continue to avoid it, it's not going to change. So in other words, in secure attachment, if I come to my marriage with an anxious attachment and then I just avoid every situation that would create anxiety for me, it's never going to change.
That's right.
So I have to put myself in that position and then have what we kind of call a corrective experience.
Now, there's a whole bunch of people listening right now who are kind of angry with you about this idea of risk. Well, let me just say what I think. I think this is where community needs to support you, knowing that, of course, you're anxious about it. And, particularly when it comes to like going to a group, maybe you might arrange to meet somebody outside a group who will walk in there with you for the first time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's extremely helpful that we have a face that knows us, that can walk. That's the whole thing with attachment. Do we feel secure? Can we go through something that's stressful and have a sense that, someone's there with us?
Risk and patience both are not the favorite words of our addiction community.
No, and I brought it up twice now in the last 2 weeks, both words.
I'm saying you're triggering our audience. That could be the trigger of the week.
Yes.
The word risk, I guess. But so we're saying that individual work, you said that earlier, trauma work, if you're particularly that disorganized attachment, individual work about if you got neglected or abandoned and you have that avoidant attachment, you still need to do some work on that. Same thing with the ambivalent anxious that, you probably had a helicopter mom. I think that's a situation in which we also see a lot of emotional incest going on. So you still need to do some individual work on that. Participation in some form of community, whether it's a counseling group, a 12-step group. I would say, and this is where I get myself in trouble, you need to be in a support group where people are willing to be vulnerable. So it's generally not, I don't know that I've ever seen a Bible study group that's built to get vulnerable and take the kind of risk we're talking about. So it needs to be more of a support group, a counseling group, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because if you're not being vulnerable, you're holding back part of yourself, and so there's always that insecurity then.
Yeah.
So it's reinforcing the insecurity rather than allowing for these secure, attachment moments to happen for a person.
Yeah, and I think you do a lot of marriage counseling, obviously, and I think one of the places couples need to start is to give themselves a break. By that I mean they came by these attachments, the unhealthy ones, quite naturally. And it's not their fault. It wasn't something they decided to do. So if they've been battling for years, 20, 30 years, we had a couple yesterday, 25 plus years, there needs to be some level of grace to yourself and forgiveness of yourself, I think, and forgiveness of your spouse. And I think that's a place that some of our couples are still stuck. They haven't spiritually gotten to that place of either one of those, being able to forgive yourself and they still have shame, or forgiving your spouse and you still have blame. So forgiveness and grace can be an essential part of moving towards secure attachment, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Securely attached couples naturally do that. When they hurt each other, which they will, all couples do. Yeah. They just instinctively move to repair. Gottman would say they move to repair quickly.
I love that statement. Yeah, move to repair. That's a tweetable moment. Yeah. I'm being Oprah now. That's a tweetable moment. So anybody who has access to the tweet, Randy, should probably tweet that one out.
Yeah.
You haven't been watching Oprah lately. You don't know.
Yes, some of us have a job and don't get to watch TV all afternoon. Come on.
This is a Sunday show that.
Oh, is it a Sunday show? Oh,
I may be getting myself in trouble because Oprah might be interpreted as a little bit more on the humanistic side of things, but she does have some interesting guests, including some Christian guests. So, and someone says something that's really poignant. She just says that's a tweetable moment. So.
Well, okay, I'll talk to the powers that be about tweeting out that very fine thought.
I think you have enough power right in this room. I'm telling you ought to do it.
I thought that was obvious. There you go. Well, gentlemen, we've come to that point then where this series has reached its end, and as usual, we'd like some sort of summation, some sort of frosting on the cake. And Jim, how would you wrap up this attachment theories series?
Yeah. I think, to say that we do need each other. We do need someone. We weren't built to go through this world alone. And so we have it all built in internally for us to move towards others. And so oftentimes the people that we're closest to, we've learned, either from our experience that, they're not approachable. We can't move towards them, or we have to move against them. So the key is to recognize we truly do need someone, and we need to move towards them, not away from them or move against them.
Thanks again for listening today to the Faithful and True podcast. This has been the third and final installment of the 3-part series on attachment styles with Dr. Mark Laaser and Jim Farm. We hope that this series has been meaningful and beneficial to you, and we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources and information that will be of interest to you. If you're a man that's struggling with sexual addiction or pornography addiction, we invite you to take a look at the Men's Journey Workshop. All the information, a brief video on the most frequently asked questions that men have about the workshop. That's all available at faithfulandtrue.com. Until we join you again next week, we hope that this coming week for you will be a week full of many blessings and with great vision.